Welcome to our discussion of legal and ethical considerations for counselors. And this will follow the information that's presented in Chapter 4 of your textbook. Henderson and Thompson do a very thorough job at introducing ethics and legal consideration for counselors. This is a chapter that is a bit overwhelming. It's filled with valuable information, and I want to remind you that this is just an introduction. It's to make you aware, generally aware of legal and ethical issues in counseling, and you'll have courses devoted just to legal and ethical issues. As I read this chapter, I can't imagine how it would feel for a young someone young in their career in training undergraduate level to encounter this overwhelming amount of really serious legal and ethical issues. Not only do you have to protect your client, which is one thing when you're talking about an adult client, but when you're talking about a client who's a child, this is very complicated, and it could also implicate you personally for legal issues. So I guess you have to really take into consideration what is the difference between ethics and ethical and legal considerations. You see in this opening slide that there's a quote by Immanuel Kant, the German idealist philosopher, and the quote is what's known as Kant's categorical imperative. And the categorical imperative is summed up in saying that we should always do the thing, we should always ask ourselves the question, if everybody did this, what would the world be like? And let that guide our ethics. And it is a pretty good heuristic to approach life with, asking yourself, if everybody acted in this way or made this decision, what would the world look like? And if it's not a better place than not doing that thing, may you live your life as if the maxim of your actions were to become universal law. If everybody did what you were doing, how would the world be? So when we're talking about ethical issues, we're talking about issues that won't necessarily get you into legal hot water or there's no enforcement of ethics beyond maybe a licensure board, the American Psychological Association or the American Counseling Association, the ACA. There could be a board of the accrediting agency that you are affiliated with, the group that has given you your licensure and sets the guidelines, and there could be repercussions from them for breach of ethics, for doing something that's not ethical. But that won't have legal considerations. That won't put you in prison. An ethical decision is a moral decision. It's the slippery kind of ambiguous area of right and wrong. So you're going to have to not only take courses in developing and becoming very knowledgeable about your ethical and legal position and what you're obliged to do legally and what you are urged to do ethically. And legal issues, of course, are issues that will definitely result in maybe financial responsibility or even imprisonment, things of this nature, legal action that could be taken against you, being sued. So this is a rather serious topic that we're addressing. The good news is no one here is going to step out of the college, out of university, out of graduate school, and right into private practice. Everyone in here is going to, at least bare minimum, have gone through an internship, externship, some sort of prolonged, year-long employment at a professional facility, and they have individuals who are experts on, or they should have individuals who are legal and ethical experts, and you'll learn by doing. Part of your training, part of the training you'll receive in starting to work at a clinic will involve you being briefed and trained on legal and ethical considerations. So you won't just be going into this having to know all this information without more guidance. And most of us out of graduate school begin working in a clinic or some sort of a county or a state funded or private counseling clinic. And each of those clinics have a person who is their advisor, their someone you can go to for legal and ethical considerations. You also have colleagues that you'll talk to, and some of those colleagues will have much more experience and many more years doing the work, and will hopefully point you in a good direction and be a good resource. Not everyone has developed their sense of ethics or their legal understanding as well as it should be addressed, but you will find that talking with colleagues, in the plural, more than one colleague, on the issue, and you'll get guidance in this. So you shouldn't feel completely overwhelmed by this completely overwhelming chapter. Here's some of the objectives from the chapter. After reading this chapter, you should be able to define ethical, professional, and legal issues in counseling, discuss principle and virtue ethics, explain competence, consent, confidentiality, privileged communication, and child abuse reporting, and use ethical decision-making model. So if you look here, explain competence, consent, confidentiality, privileged communication, and child abuse reporting. These are big issues that the chapter covers, and each of these have a legal component and an ethical component. The ethical component is what you should do, and that is beyond any type of legal action, just what you should do as a virtuous practitioner. And legal issues are what you must do as mandated by the county, the state, and the federal government, and in the country that you're working in. There's also models. The book has a fetish for presenting decision-making models with acronyms and steps and stages, and I guess this is helpful. So we'll go over those things. I tend to take a more kind of heuristic, lived experience approach to ethics and legal issues, and I'm going to present that to you because I'm going to do that early, because beyond the technical issues of this chapter, what you really have to know is that these legal and ethical issues are something that become part of you, and it's something that is also in you already. So here is how I'll explain this to you. Firstly, when you're dealing with adult clients, you will always have it at the outset their signature in writing on legal documents to protect you. this means that you're not only protecting the client, you're protecting yourself from legal issues, also from ethical issues, a breach of ethics, some sort of reprimandation from your guidance, your guiding association could be detrimental to your professional career. If it's reported and made public knowledge that you've had some sort of ethical reprimanding, then this could affect who is going to want to come to you as a client. Also, if you run into legal issues, the same thing. Probably aren't going to have too many clients after a major legal issue, and you're probably going to have considerable financial responsibility or even incarceration time for breaches of legal issues in counseling. So what I would say to you is always proceed with caution. Always keep two things in mind: the legal and ethical considerations of your client and your legal and ethical considerations to protect yourself. If something just intuitively doesn't feel right, if you feel you're doing something that might not be ethical or might not be legal, you although you could be ignorant to that and do something innocently, it's your responsibility to be aware of those legal and ethical issues, and also trust your your inner guide, trust your intuition. And if you get a feeling that something might not be right, you have to be honest with yourself about that and consult a supervisor. Excuse me. Consult someone who is made available at your agency to discuss legal and ethical considerations. Say, I did this, or I'm facing this. What is the best action for me to take? So I would say the most responsible line of defense for yourself and for your client is to consult with whomever your supervisor is that is appointed by your agency to deal with legal and ethical considerations. Sit down with them, explain the situation to them, and let them guide you, because this is going to be their specialty. But it begins with kind of a basic knowledge and an internal sense of what you should be doing. Remember, if there's something that could put your client's trust in you at risk, then you should really be considering carefully that action. Just like a friendship. And I guess some people are better friends than others. So if you have a habit in your friendships of being a gossip, of talking about people behind their backs, smiling and being nice to them, and then talking, being their confidant, and then discussing their dirty business with others, or discussing your personal problems with other people, with anybody, that's would be an ethical breach and even a legal breach in a counseling relationship. So if you on a personal level are acting in that way, these are clues that you really have to change something in your relationship with other people. I often thought that training in ethics and legal issues and counseling made me a better person, even with my friends in my personal life. It made me aware of setting clear boundaries with people. It made me aware of the precious commodity, the precious relationship of confidentiality, that when a friend comes to you, they know that it's between you and them and no one else, and that you're going to act in their best interest. These are great things that kind of seep into your personal life. So I found that studying ethics and legal issues really, I think it made me a better friend to people. So, You're also going to have many resources that your book makes available to you. At the end of the chapter, you'll see websites for legal and ethical considerations. The APA Code of Ethics website. There's a frequently asked questions page. The APA Ethical Principles for Psychologists Code of Conduct. Child Welfare Information Gateway, the U.S. Department of Education website, Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, and the National Board for Certified Counselors website. And each of those have their ethical guidelines posted that you should familiarize yourself with. And also be aware that you'll have courses, in-depth courses, to educate you in this as you go to graduate school. And you will also always have a supervisor. Now, in our class, we're not just dealing with a client, we're dealing with the child. And children have this counseling children opens up an entirely new dimension that you will have to protect that child and protect yourself for legal and ethical issues. When you're dealing with a child, you're also dealing with parents and adults. And typically, it has been my experience that children who are having troubles are often a mirror, a reflection, or a manifestation of the family unit. So you're probably going to be dealing with complicated family issues, complicated parents, parents who might be separated, divorced, or hostile towards one another, that are doing things using that child as a pawn in their personal issues or maybe their legal custody issues. It's just a very, very difficult quagmire that you have to really be careful how you walk this tightrope, and also set out front in writing with signatures the limitations, the boundaries, the things that you will do, the things you won't do, and make that very clear. That's what these statements of of consent and confidentiality, when you get the signature of the parents, and in some cases the signature of the child, that the parents are consenting to the service that you're providing and the limitations of that service, and the child is assenting. They can't give their consent, but they can give their willingness to participate in this, which in itself can be a difficult situation, because what typically a child isn't coming to you because they're asking to come to a counselor. They're coming to you because the parents are bringing them, making them come, or there could be even legal reasons that the parents are bringing the child, and so no one really wants to be there, but they're court ordered to be there. So let's start this by saying, don't get overwhelmed, don't panic. This is just an introduction to the issues, so you're aware of this, and that there will be many resources available to you when you are doing this professionally, that you won't have to have all this information in your mind, but a general approach to you're knowing ethically what how you'll conduct yourself, and knowing legally what to not get involved with or to steer clear of or be careful about is important. So let's look at some definitions. Ethics is a branch of philosophy that focuses on morals and morality in their relationship to making decisions. Ethics is not something we're born with, it's something that we learn socially. And the customs, mores, standards, and accepted practices, not only of a society and a culture, but of a profession. And as professionals, you are held to a higher a standard of ethics than in everyday life. But like I said, practicing these ethics in your everyday life makes them natural. Ethical codes educate professions about practice, conduct, provide a means of accountability, and create ways to improve. So ultimately, you want to think of ethics as not so much something you have to do, but something that's just going to make you a better counselor and a better person. So professional issues are the technical, procedural, cultural standards that members of the profession are expected to accept as part of their practice. So this is once you join a professional organization, once you have had licensure and accreditation from that institution, you are agreeing to be a part of that community and to practice within that professional community's ethical standards. Now let's look at legal issues. These are distinctly different from ethical issues, and they're related to federal, state, and municipal or county standards for practice as regulated by law. So you should realize these change from state to state, from county to county. However, there are federal issues that you should really be aware of, federal laws that will guide you and keep you safe even if you're practicing in different states. But if you move to a new state and you're working there, you have to become knowledgeable about that state's legal practices. But the federal practice regulates all of the others. There's a standard of care, target guides decisions about whether a course of action would meet the criteria. So there are agencies that you can call. You can call the county. I remember when I worked as a clinician, there were frequently times when we called the county, say, children and youth. I worked in Pennsylvania, so we had the county agency for children was called Children and Youth. It was the county agency that protected children in the court, and they had someone you called, a telephone number you called, and you didn't give your name or anything to identify you or your patient. You would just simply say, I have a hypothetical situation. Can you please tell me, does this meet the criteria for reporting? So reporting may be child abuse or the child abusing another, or with adult clients, an adult client who might be doing something is putting themselves or others in harm, child abuse or elder abuse, etc. So you'd call the Children and Youth County hotline and ask them, say, I'm a professional. Again, you don't identify yourself. You just say, I'm a professional. I have a hypothetical situation that I'd like to run past you. Hypothetical meaning it's not real. It's hypothetical. It's not really happening. And in actuality, it is really happening, but you're saying you're presenting it hypothetically to protect yourself from... And then you ask them, you explain to them the situation, you say, does this meet the criteria for reporting? And they will say yes, no, or it's getting close, etc. And then if they say yes, this definitely meets the criteria for reporting, then you have to report it. Then you can discuss that with your supervisor, your clinical supervisor, or the administrators of the institution you're working with, the agency you're working with. And that usually has to happen within 24 to 48 hours. If you suspect there's some sort of abuse going on, if the client is at risk, or if they're putting someone else at risk, if they're at risk themselves or others, then you have, in most instances, 24-hour period to report that to the county to protect yourself legally, and that has to be very well documented. So not only will you have your own documentation that you've done this reporting in your session notes, your supervisor will have documented in their notes of the meeting with you to protect you that you did the things that you were legally required to do, so that if something would happen and there would be this would go to court and your judgment would be questioned, you could cover your tracks and show at every step of the way that you did what you were supposed to do legally that you met those minimum standards uh, to to serve that client, and you protect yourself from legal issues. Virtue ethics. Um, so virtue ethics is kind of what I hinted about earlier. It's not knowing the ethical guidelines by memory. It's not like having everything memorized that's in the ACA ethics code or the American Psychological Association's code of ethics. It's just having a character, an ethical character, being a good person. That's slippery business when we use the word good, but look around in your society and think about decency and care of others, the categorical imperative of Kant, and act in a virtuous way. Do the right thing, in other words. And despite the fact that we live in a culture and a society in the 21st century where the concept of good and character and virtuous is challenged constantly, I think that you'll find at the heart of the matter, you'll know what virtue is. I believe that we still know, regardless of the games we like to play with good and bad and self-righteous indignation for someone not accepting us, I think for what our actions are, I think at the core of it, we still have a very human sense of what virtue is. So you can play lawyer and have a personal kind of ego-directed victory, or you can say for the greater good, the categorical imperative for the world as a better place, the best place we can make it, that we have a sense of character ethics, a sense of virtuous ethics, of virtue ethics, something that's just built into us as a way of being that doesn't only respect our own personal rights, but respects the rights of society as a whole, of others. So this this is something that's actually developed in when you go through your own psychotherapy. In other words, when you are working with a professional, observing, over the course of the observation hours, you build your own personal character ethics. That's why it's important to select someone that you do this training with, this internship training, where you observe their work habits and how they practice. Choose someone wisely. You want to find someone that has very good virtue ethics. So everything one needs to know cannot be in the code of ethics. The focus is on character. And as I said earlier, this is something that you develop personally, not just professionally, and relate to exceeding the obligations and striving for the ideals of the profession. So you go above and beyond what the code of ethics is in that book. What are virtues? Well, we have integrity, that's acting consistently on personal values, on things that are virtues of character. Prudence, acting with discernment and restraint, so not reacting but acting. Trustworthiness, acting and following through on commitments. And compassion, a deep concern and respect for the individual. These are some examples of what virtue is, character virtue. The textbook goes through the 6 aspects of ethical reasoning, how you sit and think about a situation where you have to make an important decision. And I would guess that the hallmark of the professional is one who's able to separate their own personal ego interests from the greater interests for society and for their client. So in other words, if you have your own emotional stuff wrapped up in this, and you are making ethical decisions from an ego, a place of ego, a self, where you don't know where you begin and end and your client begins and ends. And you'll know, how do you know this? You get strongly emotional reaction to it. Let me give I'll give you an example. There are individuals who select certain breeds of dogs in our society. And despite the legal and cultural understandings of the risk involved with the in relationship to the volatility of these certain dog breeds. The individual might be challenged to not allow a certain breed to be in an apartment building, for example. Certain breeds are banned. There's certain breeds that are legally and scientifically deemed as risk for volatile, dangerous behavior. So they could be banned from certain maybe places for walking dogs. Definitely apartment buildings and things could reject you having that animal. So the individual who reacts emotionally to that has confused themselves with that breed of dog. They've identified with that breed of dog as being misunderstood or not as dangerous as society is making them out to be, and they're or victim, and they react in a way that is beyond talking about a dog. They're talking about themselves. They've confused themselves with the dog. So that is an idea of not acting in an ethical way. An ethical individual separates their own emotional investment from the issue and clearly knows where they begin and end and where the dog begins and ends, the client begins and ends, and can make a rational, ethical decision that isn't self-serving, isn't only benefiting them, but is benefiting others. And in practice, in clinical counseling practice, we're not talking about a personal issue of being a pet owner, but being able to self-reflect and take into consideration the rights and views of society and others, not just ourselves. So, 6 aspects of ethical reasoning: autonomy, respecting freedom of choice. And that is not only your freedom of choice, but the freedom of choice of your client and the freedom of choice of others. Non-maleficence is doing things making decisions when you're going to do something or not doing something based on whether or not it will produce harm. If it produces harm, don't do it. Beneficence is a responsibility to do something that is helpful or good for another person, and that could not always be something. Sometimes the best thing to do for a client is something that's very painful to do, such as reporting them to a certain agency to protect them legally. So, in other words, if they're going to harm themselves or harm others, making that call to the county, which is going to result in a police officer or an ambulance showing up and taking them into the hospital. That might not be what your client thinks is the best thing, but you have to know that based on the criteria for self-injury or threat to others, that you have made a beneficent choice ethically. Justice, being fair. I have no idea how to define justice. This is a very complicated thing, and I think you're just going to have to take this case by case, and when in doubt, look at the ethical guidelines, look at the legal guidelines for the state and county you're working in, and talk with someone. Talk with not just someone, but talk with a supervisor who's had experience in these things. And fidelity, being faithful, being true to yourself and being true to others, remaining a consistent person who has developed their ideals and remaining true to those ideals. Veracity, being honest. Being honest with other people and being honest with yourself. So, the thing I'd like to really stress in these 6 ethical aspects of reasoning, I intentionally used the example of the decision to own certain breeds of dogs because it's a sensitive issue, and I have a feeling that there will be some people who hear this and and are identifying with a certain breed of dog, and maybe even have had the experience of struggles, legal issues, or confrontational issues with others in society. And I'm using this as an example because it will make it real for you. If you're having an emotional investment in this, that you're having a defensive reaction, this is something to look into for yourself, and to understand that you have your individual obligations, ethical and legal obligations, but you also have an ethical and legal obligation to the people that you're sharing the world with, and understanding that ethics and legal issues aren't only about you, but they're about your obligation to other people in society. And in clinical counseling, this is your obligation not only to meeting the demands of society, but also to meet the ethical and legal demands towards your client's guardians or parents, and to yourself. The textbook goes into quite a few development decision-making models. These are kind of like a algorithm for making decisions. My algorithm goes like this. I'm knowledgeable about ethical and legal considerations. If something starts to feel not right, if something starts to feel wrong within me, I go to my supervisor. If something's not settling, if something feels wrong, it's just an emotional feeling, an intuitive feeling I get, I would go to a supervisor and discuss it with them. The next step that I would do is, with the discussion with that supervisor, is to call the county agency, the reporting agency, if it's for an adult or for a child, and do the hypothetical. And I would spend time with myself also, thinking about what it is that doesn't feel absolutely right about this, and looking in the ethical guidelines and the legal guidelines of the state to see what is addressed in those guidelines. So it requires you taking and doing some work. Protect yourself legally by going to a supervisor, and hypothetical to the county, documenting those things that you did this, and also spending time thinking within yourself about what your obligations are, and researching that. So develop an ethical sensitivity, identify and define the problem. How do you develop an ethical sensitivity? Well, you do this by reading the ethical guidelines. You develop an ethical sensitivity by spending time with practitioners who are ethically sensitive. Surround yourself with ethically sensitive individuals, and you'll learn from them how to be ethically sensitive. Identify and define the problem. So if something doesn't feel right to you, then you have to spend time identifying exactly what it is that's not feeling right. Think about your own emotional reactions. That's this inner voice I'm talking about, this intuitive sense that something's not right here. And be careful that you're not misleading yourself. Be careful that you're not doing something to where you're actually confusing yourself with another individual, your own self-interests. Apply fundamental principles and theories. So these are the ethical guidelines, the legal guidelines. Apply them to the problem and see what light that sheds on it. Define the central issues and possible options. What are the multiplicities? Usually more than just two ways of addressing an issue. So explore the nuanced possible options, and that comes from talking with a supervisor, and refer to professional standards, laws, and current literature. So these are important things to consider. taking our example of outside of just everyday life, a sensitive example. Look at each of these when deciding whether or not how you should react to when you're applying for an apartment and you have a certain breed of dog that's listed on the dangerous breeds, at-risk breeds list, and then the supervisor of the apartment building said, "Sorry, we don't accept those breeds," and then you get an emotional reaction, but they are misunderstood. The breed is misunderstood, and then come and read through each of these and ask yourself the question of how this requirement was put forth and how it relates to your emotional response relates to each of these. Some of the other decision-making models is, as we've discussed, consult with colleagues and experts, involve the client in the decision-making process. So when you're working with parents, with an adult, and with children, you want to, they'll be often be in on this decision before it's done. So in other words, if the adult client is contemplating suicide, and one of the kind of rules of thumb is asking the client, do you have a plan for this? How would you do it? How would you do it? And if they can go into great detail about how they would commit suicide, then you have to have the discussion with them that you're legally and ethically obligated to report this, and let them know. They will know this up front, of course, before the counseling even begins. It'll be part of the brochure or the paperwork that they sign, that they consent to being in therapy, and they know that if you deem that they're going to be a threat to themselves or others, that you will report them to the county. They call the ambulance or the police. So this is involving them in the decision making, saying, I'm going to have to report this. Discuss the desired outcomes with your supervisor. What do you want to happen? Obviously, keeping others safe, keeping your clients safe from themselves, protecting others, protecting your client from others. If a child comes in and tells you that they're being abused, there's a legal and an ethical consideration here that you have an obligation to act on. You can't just ignore it. Consider different courses of action, choose and act and reflect on the actions taken. And these are all things you do with your supervisor, with a trusted individual. The book gives you a decision-making model. As I said, this is, I don't know how practical it is to memorize all this stuff. It's something that you just kind of develop virtue in yourself. You assess your options. You look at the ethical issues, you look at the legal issues, you explore the values, your own values and the client's values. You think about the information that you know surrounding the issue, and you look at the standards and culture. What are the considerations socially, the social standards for this issue? Be mindful of process. So the process is discussing with your supervisor, discussing with the client, discussing with the county or the state, accessing the information for the legal and ethical standards of your state and your organization. Consult with your colleagues, your supervisor. Document this all. You need a paper trail for this kind of stuff. You need to have it well documented that you did what you were supposed to do to protect yourself legally. And evaluate. Step back and say, did I do a sound job in this? Am I doing everything I could do to the best of my abilities? So here's some important guidelines to consider. Always act in the best interest of the client. You are there to serve the client and to protect them, especially with children. Always act in good faith and without malice. So obviously, don't do anything that's self-serving. Don't always do things that will ultimately serve your patient, not yourself exclusively. Be aware of your personal values, attitudes, and beliefs. So you might be dealing with an issue where your client has, the child or the adult that you're working with, the parents have different religious beliefs or ideas about sexuality and gender, or any multiple things that you personally completely disagree with, that you find offensive maybe. But it's not your job to give this kind of verdict to them. It's your job is to help them to make a decision for themselves, so you can walk and talk them through the certain risks and pros and cons and difficulties with their position, and help them to thoroughly explore those positions. But it's not your job to agree or disagree with them. You can disagree or agree or disagree with them on a personal level, but that does not enter into the therapeutic relationship. Remember, the therapy is there to help them to make the best decisions for themselves. Refer clients to another counselor if your characteristics interfere with your effectiveness as a helper. If you are fundamentally in disagreement with ideas of what's popular today, or gender and sexuality issues, if you have some personal position that is going to interfere with your ability to do therapy with someone who's having gender issues or issues of their sexuality, then you have an ethical obligation to refer those clients to another counselor, someone that's going to not have the personal emotional defensiveness and involvement in that's going to be ego-driven and not serve the client. Counseling minors is just a breed of its own. Like I said, you're not only dealing with an adult, you're dealing with a child who you have to deal with parents. And often those parents are not friendly towards one another. And you can get wrapped up in custody issues and court proceedings and testimony, and you have to document and have the signatures up front what you will and will not be involved with. And your agency usually has pre-established legal forms that all patients sign, all parents and caregivers sign. So when you're counseling minors, you have to take into consideration the state legal issues, the parent and the family, and the child. Children's rights, regardless of their age, they have the right to be respected and told the truth, to know how the evaluation process, rationale, and the results. I'm not sure how much children can understand this. You have to put it in language that the child can understand, and that I'm not sure. There are some limitations to that, because children often don't process at an adult level in thinking and understanding. They have to be told about the intervention, so the type of therapy you're doing with the child, you speak to the child in ways that the child will understand, about play therapy or about sandbox therapy. We're doing these drawings because drawings help us to understand what we're feeling, and sometimes color tells us more about feeling, and discussing that with the child in a way the child understands. Receive information about confidentiality and its limits, so the child has to know what will stay between you and the child and what you are legally and ethically obliged to discuss with the parents or with others, and letting the child know that up front. The child should be involved in decision making and goal setting, what's important, along with the family, along with the parents. Control the release of their personal information. the child should be a part of deciding what they want others to know about. Be released from treatment if unsuccessful. Not to be scapegoat of the dysfunctional family. So, as we'll see as we're getting into theory and practice of counseling upcoming, that I suggest that you always have family therapy. Family being seeing the child not as the problem, but as a manifestation of a problem of the family. So you'll have parents who have, typically when you're dealing with children, you're going to also be dealing with parents who probably need to be in therapy themselves. And oftentimes parents will put onto the child their own personal and emotional problems. That's called scapegoating. So the parent's rights and responsibility. So the parent has to provide for the child's welfare. They have to have access to information that pertains to the child's welfare. They have a right to seeking treatment for their child, participating in therapy decisions and goal setting for the child, giving permission for treatments, and releasing confidential information about their child. Again, I can't emphasize enough that you really have you have to serve the child, and you have to understand the rights and responsibilities of the parent and parents that are involved. So as far as your own ethical and legal requirements for competence, you have to have knowledge, skills, and diligence in the specialty as of area of practice. To counsel children, you must participate in specialized training, education, and supervised practice, and continuing education is necessary. So the text suggests that continuing education is knowing what new findings are for dealing with children. It's been my experience that the way to deal in psychotherapy doesn't change much, but what does change is societal trends, and that's where you might have to, for example, 20 or 30 years or 20 years ago, there was not an emphasis on the issues of transgender and sexuality. There certainly was, no issues of social media and online bullying and stuff like this. So these are areas that you'll have to remain competent in as technology changes and society changes, and it's more or less becoming aware of what's going on and how to apply your already known therapeutic methods to these new issues. Or they're not really new issues. Bullying exists, sexual issues exist. It's the new manifestation, the current manifestation in society. Okay, so what is informed consent? This is very important. This is a legal document that is given at the beginning of session when a client or a parent of a client begins, that they're legally signing that they're consenting to be in this therapeutic relationship. And it outlines all of the legal and things that'll happen, all of the things. You're protecting yourself legally to make sure that this patient and the parents of the patient know what they're getting into. They can't come back later and say, but I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know that was going to happen. Because everything that ethically or legally is going to happen is in this initial document. And again, the informed consent document will be provided by your agency that you're working for, the clinic or the institution you're working for will have these all ready to go. Templates are provided by the different professional or organizations that you might belong to. So talking about informed consent, formal permission given by a client to be in counseling. People who cannot understand the contents in a consent form or who are unable to make rational decision cannot give consent. And consent must be voluntary, and usually parent or guardian must provide permission. and the written statements such as disclosure letter or brochure are suggested. So you'll have some sort of document that the patient signs and that they get a copy of and bring home that they can consult, and that can be in the form of a brochure or a paper, a letter form, a packet, informed consent packet. Brochures make things a little more user-friendly, a little more concise, but the packet, most agencies today have both. You have the informed consent paperwork that it's like a long legal document that they sign, and then just like a frequently asked question pamphlet that's just like a briefer form of what's in that document. When we talk about issues of confidentiality, this is very important. Confidentiality is you keeping your client's personal information personal, private, and the circumstances in which confidentiality must be broken. So confidentiality is privacy ensures that people may choose what others know about them. Confidentiality refers to professional responsibility to respect and limit access to a client's personal information. And privileged communication exists by statute and applies only to those testifying in court of law. So when you meet with your patient, you have to make it clear to them the conditions legally of when you break confidentiality with the state or the county, and that's typically if they're a threat to themselves or a threat to others, or if they are in danger as a child. That's a special consideration with children. If they are being abused or exploited in some way, then confidentiality is broken with at the legal level, the state or the county level. Confidentiality with parents, letting the child know. When I worked with children, I let with the parent and the child together. So what happens in the private session between the child and I is between the child and I. That sense of trust that develops with the child I found is essential. But you have to be clear with the child and with the parent, and the parent has to agree too. The parents have to agree as well that what is discussed in that therapy session stays between me and the child, unless the child's at risk or they're putting someone else at risk. Then the confidentiality is broken. And sometimes, like I said, you'll have parents that have their own emotional issues, have their own agenda, and that child could be used to punish the other parent. The child, who knows, adults have problems, and the children suffer from those problems. So you'll have to know and set pretty strong boundaries with some parents, because they'll expect to be informed about everything that goes on and be threatened by the fact maybe they're hiding something that the child's going to reveal in therapy, and they have to know up front that you will respect the child's trust in you, and the parent has to trust you that unless there's something that this child is in danger or putting others in danger of, that confidentiality will be respected. If you have to break the confidentiality, well, then you have to discuss that with the child. Say, I'm going to have to talk with your mom about this. I'm going to have to talk with your dad about this. How are we going to go about this? Maybe suggest that you meet as a family and the child together with you discusses it with the parent. So there's, again, another area where you might want to consult your colleague or your supervisor. It's good in general to have another therapist, another counselor, another psychologist to consult with about things privately on your own time. Privacy in children. Younger children have little understanding or need for privacy. Pre-adolescents and adolescents have a heightened need. Some children may want their parents to know what is going on. Children will sometimes disclose something, hoping the adult will intervene. The adult, meaning the therapist. And children's reasoning capacity may limit the decision-making ability. So take these things into consideration. When a child is telling you what they want or don't want, always weigh that against the child's ability to make decisions at that age. Young children, it's just like young adults, we don't make the decisions at the age of 50 that we would have made at the age of 20, let alone the age of 6 or 7 or 10. So remember the child's reasoning capacity and experience in life, wisdom. That's what we call it as we get older and we learn from mistakes. There's just a wisdom that an adult will have that a child may not have developed, and you have to take that into consideration. What are some of the factors that we're discussing here about a child's competence, their ability to make decisions? Not just because they feel or want something, but it's broader than that. And children are developmentally don't have the capacity to make decisions in a way that would might benefit them in the long term. Remember, children are often very short-term satisfaction thinkers. As we get older, we learn to be more long-term decision makers. So here are some of the factors to consider related to the minor's competence. Chronological age, what's their age? What's their developmental history, their maturational situation? Cognitive level, language, memory, reasoning, logic, emotional maturity, their temperament, their stability of mood, attachment style, how they adjust in an educational system, and what's their attitudinal style, their approach, their way of being in life. As we'll learn more about this. Are they cooperative? Are they a more obstinate child? Contentious child? Sociocultural factors such as family values and religious beliefs. These all have to be taken into consideration. We're talking about confidentiality. This should be explained during the first interview with the parents and the child. It should be done orally and in writing. Things have to be in writing and signed that it was received. And professional, when is confidentiality broken? It's broken if a court orders it. If there's some sort of malpractice lawsuit, you could have your personal records, your records seized. Mental state used as defense in court. So if a client has a legal issue and their mental status is being used as a defense, your session notes could be ordered by the court for release, breaking confidentiality. If hospitalization might be necessary, you might have to provide legally your private session notes. If the client's a danger to themselves or others, or the client or the minor is victim of the crime, these are all issues that you could have to be forced to break confidentiality. So I will say to you what was taught to me. You have session notes that you legally keep for your clients. If you're working for an agency, you'll have to really keep careful session notes. Never put into writing something you wouldn't want to become public knowledge. Protect your client in this way. I was taught a rather more extreme version of this. Like you make your session notes very generic, meeting the guidelines of the state, the county, the insurance company is a factor that they're not mentioning in this book. There's insurance. A lot of these documents are for insurance purposes, which opens up a whole another aspect of confidentiality. Who's working for the insurance company? What right does or what purpose does an insurance company need to have about someone's abuse history or etc.? Very sticky ethical issues here. Nevertheless, make one set of official session notes that will potentially be seen by others if mandated by the court. I was told anything of importance keep in my memory. That if I have a reasonable amount of clients and I have a personal investment in those clients, I should have my supervisor, my mentor told me I should have no problem keeping in my memory important aspects of this individual's life that need not be documented on paper, that could be lost in confidentiality. If something's in your mind, you've protected yourself and that client. You can also possibly keep, I've never done this, but the textbook suggests this, keeping a second set of session notes that are personal and private for you. You have to protect those and keep them in a safe place and do what you can not to have the individual identified in those session notes. But you will keep them completely separate if you do that, and they're never mixed in with anything that would be released to a court. I find that one a little difficult and risky. I trust in my memory. I just trust my memory. The Buckley Amendment grants parents and students of legal age to access their files, and you don't have to give these personal ones that I'm talking about, these personal logs, etc. So what they actually have access to is pretty generic. So practice within your boundaries. What are your boundaries? The things that you're professionally able to provide that. And if you aren't, refer to someone else. Know the state laws, always explain confidentiality, maintain accurate objective records, purchase liability insurance. Your professional liability insurance is something that will be provided to you if you work for an agency, but if you work privately, you can get these. You pay per month to have liability insurance in case you get sued. And confer with colleagues. Always discuss things with supervisor and colleagues. This concludes our practical aspect of this course. We have looked at the counseling process. We have looked at a broad overview of the child's world. We have looked at the developmental and cultural considerations of dealing with children, and now we've just concluded looking at legal and ethical considerations in working with children. And we turn now to the act of counseling and psychotherapy.